What is up, everybody? I have my guest on, Robert Blackman. Robert Blackman is a friend of mine in the St. Pete area. And today I just want to talk about kind of political strategy. I talk about political strategy on my show all the time. But from my interpretation, Rob is kind of an expert, if not the expert, especially in the St. Petersburg area when it comes to getting people elected, knowing kind of the ins and outs of what it takes to actually manage a campaign. Rob, I know you do all kinds of stuff, so I don't want to pigeonhole you, but I know just given your experience and your influence in the area, I thought you'd be a great person to come on and kind of talk to my audience about, say I want to run for office, or say someone watching this wants to run for office. What are the things that you've seen, maybe to get people started? What are some of the things that you've noticed really make a difference? And to give you even more questions to think about, like, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen people made? And what are some examples of like just really well-functioning campaigns that you've seen? So you can kind of pick any one of those and we'll follow up. But the goal here, I think, is like, what is it like? What is running a campaign? What's the stuff people don't think about?
Well, thank you, Sam, for having me. Yes, viewers, Sam is a good friend of mine, and I'm happy to be here. You've asked a bunch of questions all at once. I will start trying to hop on it, and we can go however you want with the conversation. Yep. But I guess the first thing is, what kind of office are you running for? If you're running for a nonpartisan office, it's very different than a partisan office. And really, there is no such thing as a nonpartisan office these days, because people will look up your political affiliation. They'll try and make it nonpartisan. Which is unfortunate, because I still believe that local elections should be nonpartisan and there should be basic local issues at the city, county, municipal level. But that's sadly going kind of by the wayside. But if you were going to run, you want to look at, again, are you doing a nonpartisan? Because if so, it's more grassroots. If you're doing a partisan, then you really have to fall in line behind your party's leadership to make sure that you would be electable in a primary. There have been a number of elections that I have been in myself. I have won big, I have lost by a fair margin. But the number one thing is, of course, having name ID. And you can do that a number of ways. If you've been in the community for a long time, that's a good way. If you're from a community, if you have a lot of friends. But at the end of the day, you have to be out there knocking doors. You have to be raising money. Money, even if you don't. The value of money is not only important for its utility value, but it's also to show strength, that you are fundraising and that you have people behind you. So money has become increasingly important in campaigns, and even these local races are getting very, very expensive.
So what does that mean? Like, when you raise money in a political campaign, I know it's obvious that it goes toward the campaign, but how is it used? Is it used on paying people to go knock doors? Is it used for you to run political ads on Facebook? Like, what is the money primarily used for?
Paid knockers are, in my opinion, and again, these are all my opinions, paid knockers are kind of an act of desperation, because if you're paying somebody to go door knock, they do not care about your message, right? Only unpaid knockers or yourself truly care. So when you start paying knockers, I think your utility value goes down of the dollar. Door knocking is super, super important, though. We used to go the rule of thumb of 3, that in a local election, if you had 3 touches, somebody was very likely to vote for you. Be that seeing a yard sign, seeing an article in the paper, getting a mailer of yours, somebody at your door. And then if the candidate knocks on your door, people are much more likely to vote for you. And I've knocked thousands of doors for myself, for others. Money goes towards paid messaging. So you're talking about your digital ads, your mailers, which are still very, very impactful for voters over 50, and your television ads. And then there's other stuff too, yard signs, which, by the way, and you could do a whole nother podcast on this, because people have debated it for years. The lower the election is, the more value a yard sign has. And I'll tell you, the first time I ran for office, the week before the election, I'm knocking doors, and I've already got yard signs all over neighborhoods. I'm knocking doors, and my data is outdated because people have started really early voting, right? And I had the old paper sheets, so it wasn't showing how many people had early voted already. So I'm knocking doors of people who maybe hadn't voted 2 weeks ago, but they'd voted subsequently. So I keep going to doors and I'm door knocking, and I keep hitting people at the door, and I say, hey, Robert Blackman, I'm running for city council. I hope I can count on your vote. And they said, hey, I'm sorry, I already voted. I said, okay, well, can I ask who you voted for? And they said, I voted for the guy with his signs all up and down the street. I said, well, that's me. So thank you very much. But it goes to show they didn't even know they had voted for me. So if that's not value, I don't know what is, because people a lot of times on these down ballot races, they just want to get out of the polling place, or they just want to get their ballot sent in. And if they see signs in their neighbor's yard, it's like a personal endorsement.
It's so interesting to me because, one, that 3-touch rule, I don't know if I've ever heard that before. So that's interesting. But then two, knocking doors and signs, because it's one of those like super cheesy things in the political realm. And of course, on social media, like everyone's obsessed with the big races, congressional races. And I see signs and I know they have door knockers, but I feel like most people think, well, super PACs and money flowing into these campaigns are what control everything. How much Twitter clout, how many followers do you have on social media? But to some extent, it literally is still just that subliminal marketing of, one, yard signs, but then also actually having people go to a door, which I just find incredible.
Well, here's the problem. If you're a nonpartisan race, where's your money and support going to come from? Because the party typically won't support you. Now, I had support when I ran for mayor of St. Pete from a lot of party heavy hitters, but the parties themselves don't typically get involved because they're nonpartisan. So you really have to, and the state doesn't have the money to do that either. So you really have to focus on grassroots still, even up to, mayoral elections, which, St. Pete's 5th biggest city in the state. And you're still having to do this kind of stuff because door knocking is very, very labor intensive. But if you look at the changes, and again, I'm just going to go off St. Pete for a lot of these examples, the changes that have been made for the elections. So St. Pete always had off-cycle elections. You had every 2 years an election, city council, half the city council, 2 years, and the next 2 years you'd have the other half of the city council and mayor. And they always fell on odd-numbered years. This year is the first year they switched to even-numbered years. So you go from mayor or city council as being top of ticket in those races to now the top of the ticket is going to be the president of the United States. And your down ballot race is going to be city council. So, by what we're thinking, you're going to see probably 2 to 3 times the amount of people who have ever voted in a city council race vote in this year's city council races. And what that means is it's going to be a lot of people who are just in there to vote for Trump or Biden, and they want to get out of there. So they're just going to quickly poke a button on those down ballot races if they push it at all. And what you're going to want is, hey, I've never heard of any of these candidates for city council, but I saw one yard sign, or I saw one TV commercial, or as I was throwing their mailer in the trash and it was wafting down, I saw their name. These are going to be the lowest information voters you can imagine voting for the first time, because with a presidential, you're going to have over 80% turnout when a city council election typically has around 30%. So it's that extra 50% that are going to change the results of the election. And figuring out how to touch them is going to be very interesting.
Now, so we're talking about nonpartisan races. I want to switch to partisan here briefly, but to be clear, like, okay, someone goes to vote for Trump or Biden. We know that they just, okay, is there an R or a D by it? That's what they poke holes in. But yeah, for these races, it's only name. There's not going to be an R or a D by it. So they have no idea. And so they'll either leave it blank or they'll do whatever they subconsciously think is right.
That's right. I mean, a lot of times people just go straight ticket, but with the nonpartisans, it's like a judge. What do you do on a judge? You have to do a little bit of research, or you just go, hey, I've heard that name before. It's the same deal.
Which, of course, no one ever does the research. I remember even myself as someone who intently tries to do the research, like I'll look into different judges trying to figure out what their biases are. It's tough. It really is tough to figure out, okay, who's going to be a good fit for the job. And it is the epitome of, like, who do you know closest to these people who can give you like how they lean or how you think they'll be?
Well, it's just going to be, it's so interesting on these things because, judge is never top of ticket, right? So you have to do a little bit of research or call around. But like I said, when you go from, top of ticket on an off-cycle year as mayor or city council to now very bottom of ticket, when I ran for city council and for mayor, you were out there either because you liked me or you hated me, but you were there because of me. because I was the top of the ticket both times. Now you have no interest whatsoever in the city council people. And it's just how you message that when you're on a down ballot race. And yeah, judicial is always a tough thing. You can always vote for, shall we retain or not on the judges, when they don't have a opponent. So, but I think people like turnover these days in their judiciary.
So tell me on the partisan side, how did that kind of change the strategy a little bit, if at all?
A lot. So money is the main reason, and how you become the nominee, because as you look at these different districts, right, statewide, nationwide, in different districts for like state house, state senate, most of these districts are not battleground districts. There are some that have leans and they can be skewed by your gubernatorial candidate or your presidential. And that's what you see with like a DeSantis, right? DeSantis last go round was so wildly popular that he buoyed a number of other people up who were in those bubble seats, right? Where it's a couple point plus D was able to swing R because DeSantis won by such a large margin. However, for the most part, these races are predictable. And you look at, okay, is this a Democrat district? Is this a Republican district? And if it's a Republican district and you're a Republican, there's going to be a lot of competition when the elections come up, because people know that whoever gets the party's nomination is likely to win. So you have to position yourself to make sure that you are, the one who the party wants. You're the conservative choice, but also people really, really, really look at your ability to raise money. And do you have any baggage in your background? Do you have the name ID? Do you have the connections? And do you have the message that's able to sell to the people? Are you a business person? Do you have great civic engagement? Have you done a lot for the community? So these are all important things, because it's ultimately about securing that nomination. Of course, let's just say it's a plus D, maybe a plus D2, right? Democrat plus 2, Democrat plus 3. You could call that a toss-up, especially in Florida. And maybe less Republicans are interested in running for that because they know that a Democrat is likely to win it. That's where you can really make a name for yourself if you get in one of those races and something happens above you. If you're a state house race or a state senate race, if something happens above you and you're able to see the tide swing a little bit, plus you have a lot of hard work you've put in and your own money for paid messaging.
So do you still knock doors and put out signs, or are there some other nuanced strategies that you might have to look at? I mean, how pulled apart are you by some of, once the party's involved, is it now much harder to maneuver and do as you please when you're on a partisan ticket?
Well, parties a lot of times will put money into their battleground races. So Democrat Party, Republican Party, they both fund for races they think are swing or battleground races. So you can
get
only
mad after the primary, right? Only after the primary?
Right. Almost always. And they're only willing to do that if you're able to raise yourself. They're not going to say, hey, Sam, we think you're a great guy. We see you've raised no money. Let's us put $500,000 into that. That's not how that works. So you really have to show that you're a hustler yourself, and door knocking, getting community support, throwing events, throwing rallies. These are really an important way to show that you're that person. But also, like I just said, in a lot of these swing seats, being out there door knocking and messaging is important. But let me also say that anybody you see who's out there door knocking a lot and going to events and shaking hands and taking photos, even if they're not in a contested seat, well, you better watch out for those people, because they probably have it in mind to run for the next highest seat next election. So people are always campaigning, whether or not they're even campaigning, to try and go up the ladder. Some people are happy where they're at. Others have thoughts they're going to be the governor or they're going to be the president. So there's also that aspect to it, that there's always all these, threats out there, external threats for whatever seat you might be interested in, that people might want to come in who are at a lower tier.
Can you talk about, and you don't have to give me names of any campaigns or anything, but can you give me an example that you've seen of a really well-run campaign, and then maybe some mistakes you've seen some campaigns make?
Yeah. We argued a whole lot on the local level when I was on the city council. I think he would say that I was probably his biggest thorn in his side. But Mayor Rick Kreisman, former mayor of St. Petersburg, was the first person to really politicize the affiliations of the nonpartisan races in St. Pete. He really said, hey, this is a Democrat city. I am a Democrat. if you're a Democrat, you should vote for me. And it left a bad taste in some people's mouths, but it was very effective. And he was a very strong mayor and a strong mayor system. He knew the powers of the office, and he was able to execute on his vision very successfully for a number of years. Again, I don't agree with most of the decisions that Kreisman made, but he was a very strong leader, and he really showed how you can run a very good campaign with a very dedicated team, and then how you can implement your vision afterwards. I would say that some of the mistakes that have been made that I will point out are on Robert Blackman campaigns. And I don't blame anybody but myself, because, I kind of got involved in politics just thinking, hey, who are these people? I might as well be the guy. And I've run for office 3 times. The first time I ran, I got into a city council race, and it was already an 8 or a 9 person race. And I got in the week of the filing deadline, when basically the field had already been set for 6 months or more. And the filing deadline is only 2.5 months before the actual election.
Oh, and wow.
I ended up losing significantly in the early voting, because ballots came out about a month and a half after the day I filed. And I won by a landslide on election day. However, because I was so behind in early voting, I ended up losing by 2 votes, not 2%, but 2 votes.
Yeah.
But of a lot of jokes for that. But people also said, who is this kid who came out of nowhere in a very short time and won on election day? And I won by a huge margin on election day too. So because of that, I got my name out there, ran for city council again 2 years later, and won by 28 points. 28 points, not percent, points that time. So it was a landslide. And because of that, I then ran for mayor 2 years after that. And again, the field had been set for literally 4 years. The top 2 candidates had been in the race, had announced 4 years before, and had been fundraising for 4 years. I got in 12 minutes before the filing deadline, 12 minutes. And the race was, again, it was 3 months out, and was able to get through the primary. It was, I think, an 8 or 9 man race again. I had a little over $200,000 in the primary, and the 2 opponents who were really the field was set for, the woman who got third had over $1 million, and the guy who got first had at the time about $550,000. So I was out fundraised 4-1 by somebody I beat, and 2-1 by somebody who I was going to the runoff with. And then the runoff, there's a lot of scrutiny, and the money game really just got on top of me. And it goes to show how important it was. To have an attack ad is very expensive. So we put attacks out the window, and you just had to message for yourself. And he ended up getting about a little over $1 million himself, and I did about $500,000. So again, the money game just wasn't even close. And I ended up ultimately getting second in that race. So I guess the first thing I'd say is these surprise attacks where you get in real late, they don't work nearly as well these days, because you have early voting, and people, once they make their decision, like to go with that decision. So time is really a factor that I always took for granted. And I would caution anybody else against getting in a race too late.
Can you tell me what makes attack ads so expensive?
Because how do you connect it, right? If I just say Sam's a jerk, okay, sure. How many times do you have to repeat that Sam is a jerk for that to really sink into the consciousness? A lot, because it's hard to message people with social media, with TV, mail. You have to have a diverse base of these attacks, have to be completely permeating if they're not being presented by earned media. If it's just some opinion, or I'm trying to drudge up an old record of yours. So to get an attack ad out there is just very difficult and expensive as part of it. But then I also have to develop why Sam is a jerk, right? What has he done that's wrong? And for me to get people to understand and connect the dots and really focus when it's 30-second ads or it's a mailer, it's tough to do because people don't want to read. Their attention span is short. So I have to really be clear, concise, and I have to hit you multiple times to prove why my premise of this person being bad is true.
Given our conversation on subliminal messaging, especially with these signs, can attack ads actually help your opponent sometimes too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If it's not executed properly, An attack ad can absolutely help the other side. And that's why they're so risky. Like, unless you're running against somebody who is, very easily attacked or has a bad record. I mean, a good example is the woman who got third in that mayoral race, who's a friend of mine. She tried to do an attack ad, and there ended up being sympathy for the guy who I ended up being in the general election for, because they felt bad because the attack was not well done. So there's always a risk associated with that. But also what you just said, if you're not concisely saying why this person, is not the right choice, it can actually boost their name ID and help them out too.
One of the most fascinating things I think about our current time, especially just in our Trump-esque era with media, is, for example, even on a local level, you could call someone, oh, this person has a history with drug addiction. And then they just flip it and be like, look at what I've overcome. Look at how I've bettered myself. And now they're more relatable. Right. And I think we see that all the time in our current media, how and I've seen Biden try to do it a few times. He's not as good as it is as Trump, I don't think, but he's had some few times where I'm like, oh, I see what they're doing. I'm seeing how they're taking this negative and flipping it to a positive. But all that matters is, especially at a local level, I guess, is name ID. So it's like, oh, okay, you're almost, in a sense, yeah, if it's executed poorly, just giving free name ID individually to voters.
So there's a state senator here in the Tampa Bay area. His name's Darrell Rouson, and he was a state house member, and he was the head of the NAACP before that. He, and I'm not telling tales out of school because he's very open with it and he's very involved in the community. He had a severe drug addiction for a number of years. And, every once in a while you'll hear somebody say, oh, Rouson, he's a drug addict. Couldn't somebody throw that at him? Well, it's really hard to throw that at somebody when they're out there speaking at addiction clinics. They're out there trying to help people recover from addiction. Yeah. They're paying for scholarships. I actually had the senator help me with a couple interventions we threw. He sponsored a friend of mine to go to rehab. So, if you really tried to attack somebody for something like that, it would blow up in your face. Also, just off topic, again, thank you to Darrell for all he has done. Because drug addictions become so bad. But again, if you're going to do an attack, you better be darn sure it's going to work, because it can absolutely explode in your face. And the other thing is, people have become so much more skeptical of what they hear, as you just said. In our modern era, can you trust what you're hearing on these attack ads? The advent of fake news, where can you trust what you're getting? We already know that with campaign commercials and flyers, a lot of that is, paid partisan, kind of hits. So it's tough to discern where you're getting your information from. Can you trust it, and will it land?
So I have a question that you're probably not going to be able to answer too well, because I don't think anyone has an answer. But you gave an example how this lady in your campaign outfunded you 4-1, but you still beat her. But then someone who outfunded you 2-1 beat you, right? I believe that's what you said. So like, how much does money matter? Because it seems money matters up into a point, and then there's like a cap on what money can do for you. Is there a principle for that? Or is it just these people with a lot of money are inexperienced and don't know how to spend it? I mean, I know like one thing that made Rick Scott such a big deal and continues to do so is he just had a ton of money, and he came in and was just able to blast ads like no tomorrow. And I think maybe he took that same approach in the Senate. But I also know, he did have good ground game strategy, and I've looked into some of his strategy behind like how he won his gubernatorial election. But what is that like money cap? Like what does it work? Money works up until what point?
So let me be clear. I would always rather be the candidate with more money. That's always really important. And again, it's not just important for the utility of the money, which is hugely important, but for showing your strength. Who has the more money? Oh, they're probably going to win. So more money begets more money, begets support, because people think that you're the leader because of what you've raised. That being said, I think, I've had shorter campaigns, so I didn't have the burn rate for a number of years and with all these things that some of the other, people I'd run against might have. The other thing, of course, is, and I used to say this all the time in debates, hey, I'm a better fiscal steward because I have less money and I've been able to still effectively message. But I'll tell you, we've always had to do without. in campaigns. And you always think, if I had that one more mailer, or I had one more week on TV, or twice as much saturation, could I have gotten my message out more effectively? And I think almost always the answer is yes. If you are effective with your money, money is going to be huge. So is there a cap to its efficacy? Yes. Some of the stuff I'm talking about was also just national tide and local tide based on demographics. Even though there were partisan elections, I'm a right-leaning guy. My opponent was a left-leaning guy for mayor. It was a strong, pro-D time. There was a real climate of we need to have equality of who we're supporting. He was a very experienced 20-year in office African-American guy who has a lot of success in the community. I was the young white kid who had a couple of years under my belt on city council. So some of that stuff, was different demographics that money couldn't have overcome. But if I had enough of it, we could have made a run for it. It's just sometimes you have demographics stack up against you that are going to be difficult to beat.
When you're weighing how to spend money, like what are some of the primary ways? You mentioned mailers, you mentioned maybe TV ad buys. I know there's Facebook and social media targeting. Are there others, and are there ones that you find are the most effective?
Yeah, I mean, new media, social media is huge, and it's also really cheap. So that's why if you can effectively do it and target, you can also do all sorts of micro targeting, right? You can target only Republicans. You can target only Democrats. You can target people over 50. You can target people in demographic areas. That's why new media is important, because of its cost and the ability to target. However, majority of voters are over 50. People over 50 are still reading that mail every day. And again, even if I would say, the one critique I always had on every mailer I ever did is when they'd show me the sample, they said, "What do you think about this?" I said, "Great, but make my name bigger." All I wanted was my name huge, because as what I always say is, as that flyer is wafting into the trash can, I want them to see my name for 1 second. That's it. Don't need you to read the whole thing. I just want you to see my name as you're throwing it away. And if you do that, I've had an effective touch. Mail is super, super important, especially on municipals, because the people who care the most about municipals are those over 50. TV, I still think is effective, again, for those over 50, and it usually kind of makes a splash, but TV also gets your base kind of hyped up. I know that person, oh my gosh, that's my friend. It really energizes people, as well as getting to, again, those who are still watching cable. So those would be the three things. And then your staff, of course. Do you have an office, right? Do you have software you're paying for? Do you have a campaign manager and a consultant? Are you just paying, a consultant? Do you have a volunteer manager? Do you have then a field director? It depends on how big the campaign is. And then, of course, you have the org chart come out under that, depending on how high up you're running. But it depends on staff a lot, because that's going to be a very expensive campaign expenditure as well.
How do you find the right staff? Are they given to you? Are they mentioned to you? I know some people just go with their best friend. I know some people hire just whatever consulting firm they think they can trust, because that's got to be probably one of the hardest things that can make or break a campaign, I assume.
Yeah. And the other thing is, typically on a local election, city council, even mayor, your manager can be somebody you know and trust, right? A friend of yours, somebody who's been there with you. But your consultant is going to be driving your direction, right? This is the messaging. This is what we're doing. And you also trust your consultant to have relationships with other politicians that you may not have, right? So, hey, we need endorsements. I can get this person on the phone because I'm a consultant, not me, I'm saying with the person.
Yep.
I've known them for years and years. They've done all these campaigns, and that's where you get a lot of your early base and endorsements. It's super important to get the right firm. There's, a number of good firms statewide for consulting agencies. In terms of managers, you're kind of on your own for the most part, and your local field team, you kind of need to assemble. So you want somebody kind of, but here's the other thing. Are you going to get a volunteer? If so, is that friend of yours going to be your friend at the end of the ride here? because it's a lot of work. I had a buddy of mine from high school who was my de facto manager on my mayoral campaign. And he isn't even aligned with me politically, right? He just said, hey, it's a nonpartisan election. I know you have good ideas that cross the aisle. I'm going to fight for you. Man, he worked his tail off, and he was absolutely unrelenting in doing work. I didn't know it was going to be like that going in, right? I hoped he would perform like that, but he actually outperformed any of my expectations. And that's the kind of gem, you want to get. He was a very good friend, still is, and he was willing to go kind of that extra mile. However, you don't want to get halfway into a campaign and see the opposite of that, where the person's not performing. But, I fully believe that due to his tireless efforts, we outperformed, which we did. We outperformed the expectations for, the partisan people who voted, the registration. I think we outperformed it because he worked so hard. So if you get the right person, it can be worth multiple points on the ballot.
How much of it is just luck?
Well, a lot of it would have to be timing too. Like I said, the climate was not great for the demographics when I ran for mayor. But then you look at stuff like 4 years before, in 2017, you had Rick Kreisman, who I mentioned earlier, who's a Democrat, and Rick Baker, who was a beloved former mayor, running. Kreisman was going for re-election. Baker was going for his third term. He was coming out of retirement. And the top of the ticket, not even the top of the ticket, excuse me, the presidency, Trump had the issue with Charlottesville, and all sorts of national climate was going anti-Trump. It was an anti-Republican current that ended up basically kneecapping his campaign. It was a very close race. I think it was within 2 points. And it would have been a winnable race if it hadn't been for the national climate. That's the kind of stuff you got to watch out for, especially, a mayorship is an executive position. The presidency is an executive position. And then, of course, governor. So people want to say, hey, is this executive, aligned with the values of the top of ticket executive? And if you have a very popular at the moment president, governor, you want to stick as close as you can to that person. And if there's some controversy, it could negatively impact you. And that is certainly the kind of externality that you could chalk up to luck, because you can't control or predict these kind of things. When you're talking local stuff or even state stuff, you can't control what's going to happen at the top. But that would fall into the category, I'd say, of luck.
So if someone's watching this and they're thinking about running for office, and most people I know are looking at running for, some kind of partisan office, I would say, where would they start? What's the first step?
Your local party, absolutely. So join your county party. It's one of the most important things you can do, and it's where you can get all the information, because before the meetings, after the meetings, everybody's talking. And you have a lot of elected officials go to those who have most of the gossip, I guess you'd say. But you also have probably 75% of the people have no interest whatsoever in running for office. But you know why they're there? Because they care so much about their political affiliation. So if you have, a room of 200 people and 150 of them are just super passionate about the mission, guess where your volunteer base is going to come from? Guess where your donors are going to come from? Guess where your phone banking is going to come from, which we didn't talk about, but phone banking is important. Guess where your door knockers? They're all going to be from the party and party membership, but also this is where you're going to find out, hey, I hear there's a county commission seat, or I hear there's a state, House seat coming up. Is there anybody who's going to run for that? Oh, there's not. Or, oh, you're looking for somebody? Well, I'd like to be interested in doing that. And let me start building my case for why I'm the man or woman for that job. So that is the most valuable place you can get information, is your county party. And that's probably where you should start at. And then, talk to your family. And then one of the most important lessons too, in terms of a monetary standpoint, is, and it sounds so stupid, and I felt like such an idiot doing this, but I tell everybody else to do it now. If you were going to run for office today, write down a list of everybody who you think would give at least $50. Okay, so I can put Sam down for 50, put Sam's parents down for 100, whatever. When you've totaled up everybody you know who you think would actually give you at least $50, you then divide that list by 2. And that is how much you can reliably raise to get started on a campaign. So whatever your estimate is, cut it in half. And that shows you, hey, I think I have the viability to at least get started and get some momentum going, or hey, this isn't going to work. I'm a little green. I need to get some more experience under my belt. I need to meet some more people in the community.
Got it. That's great advice. Do you have you answered all my big main questions. Do you have any kind of last comments that you think anybody should know or be aware of?
The real thing, I guess, is you're seeing a generational shift right now. And, I don't want to be that person who says, ever ageism, but you are seeing a lot of younger people enter the arena. When I was elected to the city council, was elected as the youngest person in the history of the city since its incorporation to the city council. Wow. And I remember the paper at the time, I was 30. The paper at the time said, Robert Blackman is the youngest person ever elected to city council. That's good news because we have the youngest ever, but that's bad news because he's 30. It's not that young. So my point, though, is there's a lot of younger people coming into the fold. I've got 2 friends of mine right now that I've known for years who are running for office based on the sheer fact they said, hey, I know you, and you got us excited about politics. We're going to try it out now. So 2 different people I know are running because they saw, what I did with council for mayor. I just think if people are interested, do it, because it's a great experience as long as you do it right and you work hard. The only way you can go wrong is if you get into a race and you don't take it seriously, because then you're damaged goods forever. But, like I said, I worked so hard and I came in so late that losing by 2 votes, everyone said, hey, this guy really is an earnest, hardworking guy. And it ended up benefiting me long term, even though I lost. So I would advise everybody, get involved, because it is very important that we get some fresh voices out there, and don't be intimidated that, you haven't been in the political field forever. If you've been doing the right stuff in your community, you probably have a great voice and a great perspective that it would be valuable to be heard from at any level of government.
Good deal. All right. Well, thanks, Rob, for your time. This was awesome. And I think everyone I share it with is going to love it. So I appreciate your time. I'll probably, maybe as 2024 ramps up, I may have you back on and get some of your analysis of different campaign strategies that we're seeing at different levels.
Be great. Always happy to be here.